Story 1. I will preface this by saying I am a huge fan of the book. I read it almost every year around Halloween. I have probably read or listened to an audio version 20 times. I love the story and the philosophical implications. I thought he captured the general spirit of the story, and I liked how they split it, but I think it missed some critical themes. The book is loaded with themes, and I am not sure how you can squeeze them all into a movie. Of course, he had to change and compress some aspects. Overall, he did a good job, and any fan should be grateful for a solid film interpretation. Furthermore, the cinematography was amazing. I would have loved it as an 8 to 10 episode miniseries. That format could have really told the whole story, which I think is important to convey the book's full point. Story 2. I'm not a huge Frankenstein fan, but this movie is great. As a Dane, I enjoyed seeing Danish actors in it. Story 3. I can't believe how good it was. I hadn't heard anything about it before I saw it, and it blew me away. One of the best movies I've seen in a long time. Story 4. My perspective is an outlier since many others seem to love it. The production design was incredible, as Guillermo del Toro's films usually are. However, the plot, characters, and dialogue were weak except for a few strong lines. I did not like the monster design. The pacing was uneven. Many scenes felt unnecessary while more important ones seemed rushed. Overall, it did not land with me. Story 5. I loved Jacob's performance. The effects were amazing, too. Story 6. It was fine. I thought the plotline of Victor trying to steal his sister-in-law was funny, even if it was not intended to be. The ending did not feel right, and it made little sense for the monster to forgive Victor after wanting to kill him an hour earlier. Story 7. I thought it was pretty good. However, some of the writing, especially one line, made me lament the need to explain the film's theme on screen. Do we really need a character to stare at the screen and state the main idea? Is media literacy really that poor these days? Story 8. Just watched this last night with my wife. 7 out of 10. Overall, an enjoyable film that held my interest despite a long runtime, but some of the acting was subpar. I did not like Waltz's performance at all, while Goth was less impressive. Some of the technical set pieces felt a little too modern and out of place. Much of it was probably computer-generated imagery, but it could have felt more of its time. These are fairly minor complaints. Jacob Elordi was great as the monster. Story 9. Loved it. I don't recall ever seeing a Frankenstein movie that covers the creature's point of view. I really liked that. Story 10. It was watchable but nothing special. I am a bit surprised by the rave reviews it received. The bond between Frankenstein and Mia Goth was not sufficiently developed for her final scene to have the intended impact. The storyline felt a bit rushed. I think Guillermo del Toro's films are pretty overrated, to be honest. Story 11. It was okay. I was expecting better. The biggest disappointment was Oscar Isaac as Frankenstein, even though I love him. His accent was awful, and he pranced around like a high school student auditioning for Hamlet. He ruined the movie for me. Story 12. I found it boring and was surprised by the positive comments. Perhaps selection bias. I did not like the pacing. The story was forgettable. Much of it looked fake, and I was not a fan of the monster design. Story 13. It was just okay. I wasn't sure why, but I wasn't invested. I preferred the Robert De Niro version. It felt more horrific than this new one. Story 14. I liked it. Some of the changes from the book I enjoyed. Others were just okay. Stylistically, it was interesting, but I would have liked a more Wrightson-like tone in places, since he based many moments on Bernie Wrightson's plates. Some of the visual effects looked a bit off and unnecessary, since much of the work was done practically. I would recommend it to someone who has never seen a movie adaptation. Story 15. I enjoyed it a lot, but I am not sure I will rewatch it anytime soon. Story 16. One of the better films I have watched this year. Some great performances across the cast, with the exception of the occasional uneven accent. Excellent monster design, incredible sets, and visually interesting overall. The story did feel slightly truncated in the second half, but not to the extent that it ruined the film. 8 out of 10 for me. Story 17. My girlfriend and I saw it in the theater, and we absolutely loved it. Story 18. I liked it quite a bit. It's the closest adaptation of the book that I am aware of, and I love it. The only thing that annoyed me was that the book's monster was described as horrifically ugly, with people recoiling at his mere sight. In the movie he seemed more odd than ugly, although they did pay lip service to how ugly he supposedly was. I understand why. Most actors would not want their faces obscured or to be made extremely hideous. Still annoying. The actor who played Nosferatu a couple of years ago went all in. Edit. I should be more fair. I have no clue whose idea it was not to make the monster very ugly. Maybe Elordi had nothing to do with that decision. Story 19. I thought it was really good. I felt more sympathy for the monster than in other adaptations. That being said, the cinematography often had that Del Toro third-person shooter type of angle. It's generally fine, but I'd like to see him mix it up more. Story 20. Visually, it is absolutely stunning. Guillermo del Toro really knows how to shoot a movie. Every shot feels like a surreal painting, with rich colors and depth. As always, the practical effects del Toro uses shine. Narratively, it is pretty good, better than most of the junk out there. Jacob Elordi, who plays Frankenstein's monster, does a fantastic job. I could hardly recognize him. He brought a lot to the role. His body language adds so much to the character. He is truly a tragic figure, and you feel it through the performance. Oscar Isaac plays a misguided scientist. He portrays an arrogant, narcissistic character who treats the villain role as if he were the hero. You want him to learn from his mistakes, but he never lets up. The movie is worth watching for the visual style alone. It is not particularly scary. It is gothic horror played more as an action movie than as straightforward horror. Story 21. Whenever I watch his movies, I am reminded of how disappointing they are. Not only are they boring, but he made odd choices that deviated from the story for no good reason and ruined some characters. Story 22. I am neither a fan of very long movies nor of the Frankenstein tale, but I think the film is highly recommendable. The sound and visuals are stunning, and the story is well told, conveying a strong atmosphere. The actors deliver excellent performances. It is a very good film, but in my opinion, it is still too long. I think it could have been shortened to 2 hours and it would be fine. Story 23. The film is too long. The first hour is mostly unnecessary and a drag. The acting is mediocre, with Oscar Isaac and Mia Goth the main offenders. It has that weird Netflix filter. The dialogue is poor and the computer-generated imagery is subpar for 2025. The book was completely dumbed down and it feels like the first movie made specifically for TikTok. Story 24. Sorry, I can't access or transform content from that link. If you paste the article text here, I can correct spelling, expand acronyms, remove repetition and special characters, and format it for Azure text-to-speech. Alternatively, I can produce a concise TTS-friendly summary of the article. Which would you like? Story 25. His dialogue can be so cringeworthy, but he makes his films really pretty to look at. Story 26. It was very pretty and featured some good acting, although Victor strongly reminded me of Harold Steptoe. I wish they would not mess with the story. They are not nearly as good writers as Mary Shelley. The additions do not help the story and are mostly a waste of time and effort. I am thinking here of Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. They also cut out some of the major themes, which waters the story down. It is okay, but it is certainly not as good as the National Theatre production of Frankenstein with Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller. Story 27. I really liked it. I didn't know anything about it going in and was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. However, the last 20 minutes felt very rushed. The monster and Frankenstein suddenly put their differences aside, even though Frankenstein had been hunting the monster for years and only 5 minutes earlier had been pursuing him. I would say the first 85% of the movie is an 8.5 out of 10, and the last 15% is a 5 out of 10. I'm curious if anyone else felt this way. Story 28. Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein brings a unique and captivating visual style. Story 29. One of my favorite films of the year. That being said, the film fundamentally changes some of the core themes of Frankenstein and introduces elements that seem superfluous. For example, it introduces a financier named Harlinda. That choice seems odd because in the book Dr. Frankenstein had a childhood friend, Henry Clerval, who could have been repurposed as the financier. More importantly, one of the film's main themes and motivations for Frankenstein is that he will conquer death. A teenage Frankenstein even says so. This is a distinct shift from the book, where his motivation was not to conquer death but to create life. Moreover, he does not even conquer death in the film. They explicitly show the creature as essentially a newborn child rather than a reanimated being. Also, as I remember, the film's ending is completely different from the book. Story 30. It is probably the closest thing to an accurate book-based telling of Frankenstein we will ever get. Guillermo del Toro took some liberties, which for the most part were interesting and effective changes from the original tale. There were moments that were not great, but as a whole I really enjoyed the movie and I recommend you watch it. Story 31. Fantastic. I recommend watching the behind-the-scenes documentary if you have not. It gave me even more appreciation for the film and for what went into making it. Story 32. I enjoyed it. I did not care much for the parts that deviated from the book, though. At best, they were unnecessary. At worst, they weakened the story and themes. I also groaned several times at moments that were too on the nose, such as the line "You are the real monster, Victor," the casting of the same actress as Victor's mother and his romantic interest, and the constant drinking of milk. Story 33. It is a beautiful film. I still prefer the Kenneth Branagh version of the story. Story 34. I think the second act dragged out a bit. They could have cut at least half an hour from it. It was beautiful to watch with excellent performances. Story 35. I watched it last night and was underwhelmed. It felt like Bridgerton with a monster that looks suspiciously similar to the creature from Prometheus and Alien Resurrection. Story 36. I usually hate fantasy, and I thought it was only okay. It has a cheesy ending and, above all, horrible computer-generated imagery. Story 37. I thought it was really good. One of the better movies I have seen in the last couple of years. Story 38. I liked it. It had its warts, but it was the best movie I have seen since Nosferatu. It seems the best movies being made right now are adaptations of 1800s horror novels. Story 39. I am not sure it lived up to the hype of being the best horror movie of the year, but I liked it. Story 40. It is a story about hope, forgiveness, and breaking toxic patterns. I loved it. Story 41. I watched it and loved it. I did not know the full story beyond pop culture, so seeing it unfold this way was awesome. The whole film was visually striking. Every scene felt handcrafted. Oscar Isaac, who plays Victor, was excellent. He carried much of the emotional weight and made the story hit much harder. Overall, a very well-made film. Story 42. I did not love it. The whole part about him miraculously healing his wounds felt implausible. Why would someone made of sewn-together dead parts have magical healing ability? The section where he lived undetected in the family's house strained credulity. Come on, they would have heard him moving around, seen him go outside to urinate or defecate, or noticed smoke and smelled his cooking if he prepared food. Where did he get food? How could he be running around in the snow half-dressed without getting hypothermia and frostbite? I guess I am too literal-minded. It was too unbelievable. I need my fantasy to be more grounded in reality. Story 43. Loved it. I know it's not as faithful to the book as the 1994 film, but I feel he nailed the vibe and philosophy of the books better than any other adaptation. The most important elements are there: the weirdly erotic tone, the absolutely terrible parenting, and Victor's abandonment. Story 44. I liked it. It was solid, but I was not as amazed as everyone else seemed to be. Story 45. I will add a second question if anyone is willing to answer. Is it closer to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or to modern reimaginings? I am not usually upset when movie adaptations deviate from the original, but I enjoyed the book and have not found other interpretations particularly interesting. Story 46. I have been obsessively waiting for this. but I was pretty sure it was still in production and was not scheduled to come out until 2025. I will watch anything Guillermo del Toro makes, and the cast, Oscar Isaac, Andrew Garfield, and Mia Goth, looks absolutely stacked. Are you maybe thinking of a different Frankenstein movie? Or did you get to see some kind of secret advanced screening? If you did, I am insanely jealous. Story 47. Seeing Oscar Isaac reminded me of his other Frankenstein-inspired role in Ex Machina. Both works are good in different ways, but I enjoyed Ex Machina more. Of the recent Frankenstein adaptations, I like the monster in Penny Dreadful the most, played by Rory Kinnear. Story 48, meh, to be honest. I liked the cinematography, though. Some very picturesque shots. Story 49. Jacob Elordi should be nominated for an Academy Award for his performance next year. Story 50. It's great. Probably the best depiction of Victor's mania. I loved that it makes perfectly clear that Victor is the monster. Story 51. It was entertaining enough, but it felt rushed and was not as good as others have hyped it to be. Overall, I liked it. Story 52. It was good but not great. There have been many Frankenstein films, and this one did not bring much new to the table. Parts of it reminded me too much of Young Frankenstein and the Rocky Horror Show to take seriously. Story 53. I enjoyed the look, even though it has a fake modern film style. But the story, I'm not a fan. I really don't like some of the changes. It's not for time's sake because most changes were time-consuming. It was a pity that one of my favorite parts was butchered. The entire sequence of the monster coming to Victor's house. I think I preferred Kenneth Branagh's version. I didn't really like this one. Story 54. Crazy. I watched this last night. I am not into Frankenstein or any horror genre, but I found myself drawn in. I thought it was really good. Story 55. There's one thing I can't get over in the story. I'm not sure if it's better explained in the book. In the film, it seemed Victor was trying to build the perfect specimen. Tall with long limbs to make the work easier. What I don't understand is why he couldn't just find a single body that was almost perfect. There must have been soldiers who were young and in decent health who died from a single bullet and blood loss. Or, as mad as Victor was, I wouldn't put it past him to pick someone while they were still alive and have them die shortly before attempting to reanimate them. At least they wouldn't look like a corpse. He had already proven he could stitch different body parts together and have them function as one. If his true goal was to conquer death, why not try to bring a single individual back to life? Story 56. It was fine. Strong opening and final acts, but it sagged in the middle and became boring for a while. It was worth a watch, I'd say. Story 57. I disliked most of the changes from the book. I am not a book purist, but the book is rightfully a classic, and most changes made the overall story worse. I also disliked that Victor did not immediately dislike the monster when it came to life. Story 58. I did not expect much. Del Toro is a good director at times. I was drawn into the movie and really liked it. I last read the book more than 20 years ago, and I felt the movie showed much more of the story than most Frankenstein films, although it left out some elements. The ending was a bit cheesy, but it still conveyed a good message. I would give it 7 to 8 out of 10. Story 59. My wife really likes it. She keeps searching for Jacob Elordi now, though. Story 60. As someone who has never read the book and is more familiar with Guillermo del Toro's films than with Frankenstein as an intellectual property, I thought it was good, not great. I would rate it a 7 out of 10. I think nearly everyone involved in making the film, except the score, which I thought was surprisingly weak, was working at the top of their craft, but some of the choices did not work for me. There were moments of brilliance, and I thought the framing device was well done. In my opinion, the scenes in the Arctic were the best in the film. I found the pacing rough, and it did not feel like the runtime was justified. Victor's story dragged between a few really great scenes, for example when he first showed off his living creation, which I loved. The practical effects used to create the monster were very well done and a lot of fun. My main gripe was that it took what I expected to be a moderately creepy or disturbing story and turned it into a young adult novel-style tale mixed with a bit of The Shape of Water. The creature was made wholly sympathetic, which I do not think fully worked, and the design was not pushed far enough. It essentially looked like an attractive human with pale skin and some scars. In the book, is he not supposed to be horrifying rather than kind of beautiful? I thought focusing the story heavily on maternal and paternal issues and forgiveness was a good idea, but the movie is so long that the message got a little lost because I do not see people really talking about that aspect despite it being the central theme. It is a story that will be adapted repeatedly, so there is room for many different takes, but I do not think this was the quintessential version for my taste. I have seen many fan edits on TikTok that cast Jacob Elordi as the monster, and I think that shows the audience it is resonating with most. The sets and costuming were excellent. Story 61. Absolutely no atmosphere. If there is any, it feels like a random superhero movie. Everything is shown, and nothing is left to the imagination, which would make scenes more impactful. For example, show only an arm appearing briefly from below a shadow to catch the ball. Most scenes had the scare factor of a set piece from Fallout 4. Story 62. I loved the amount of care and detail put into it, and Jacob Elordi, oh my god. Story 63. Is it worth watching when you have already seen 10 other versions of the story in movies, stage plays, and books? Is there a reason to watch this particular version? Story 64. The only thing I did not like was Mia Goth's accent, but even that was not enough to make me dislike her characters. Story 65. I enjoyed it. I was a big fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Robert De Niro, but this was just as good in a different way. Story 66. I expected a Guillermo-style film and I got one. A beautiful, almost over-the-top epic. I did not expect Jacob Elordi's amazing performance. I enjoyed it immensely with my 11-year-old. It has an all-ages quality. We rewatched it. Story 67. I wasn't into it. Oscar Isaac is not a good actor. It directly rips off Coppola's Dracula. He basically wants to make a Frankenstein version of that film. Story 68. I loved it as a Frankenstein fan. Del Toro made the creature much more of a victim, which I'd argue is true. He changed some elements that fit the story better. The film was amazing, and I am so glad I saw it in theaters. Story 69. It made me feel great. I love how it portrays the monsters in a way that makes you empathize with and care for them. I was glued to the story the entire time. I have never read the book but now want to after seeing a more accurate portrayal. Story 70. It should have been released in theaters nationwide on Halloween. I think they miscalculated. It would have done well. Story 71. It is a very long movie. The pacing is slow. Visually, it is spectacular. I might have enjoyed it more at 1.5 times the normal speed. Story 72. I'm not a fan of these tragic stories. I suppose the original message was to teach people not to play God, to avoid unchecked ambitions, and to consider consequences. I'm already someone who thinks carefully before I act, so I was aware of those lessons. I guess the movie wasn't for me. I had hoped for a non-faithful adaptation with an uplifting story and a happy ending. Story 73. Even though I am so done with Hollywood's endless remakes, the movie was well-made and overall enjoyable. Story 74. I loved it. I enjoy weird, artsy movies, so Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite directors. Story 75. Jacob Elordi as the creature was my favorite. He did an amazing job. Oscar Isaac always does great work, and his portrayal of Victor made me dislike the character. Story 76. It was so different from the book that I could not concentrate on the movie. Elizabeth, William, and even the fathers were changed. I was yelling at the TV and turned it off halfway through. Sure, change the story completely for artistic license. That is fine, everyone does it, but it irritated me. Story 77. I have not seen it yet, but I really want to. The visual style of Guillermo del Toro seems perfect for Frankenstein. I hope he leans into the gothic horror elements and does not sanitize it too much for modern audiences. Story 78. I loved every minute of it. It is a melding of inspiration and artistry that just works perfectly. Del Toro's sympathetic eye for monsters was the perfect fit for this story. The only real criticism I can make, which is a compliment in disguise, is that the computer-generated imagery wolves attacking the sheep stand out because the rest of the film relies on practical, handmade effects. I respect the choice because that kind of speed and movement cannot be captured with puppets and would endanger real animals. There is merit to the creature's tail feeling truncated, which speaks to how compelling the performance is. I could have watched more of that story. It is my movie of the year so far. Story 79. The film was good and entertaining, but it was missing something. It felt abbreviated, which is strange to say about such a long movie. Story 80. The monster was far more evil in the book, and Victor was not that big an asshole. Del Toro loves monsters so much that he forgot to make this one complex. Story 81. I did not enjoy it. It felt heavy-handed with Hollywood angles and over-explained details. The exaggerated environment was unbelievable. I love the idea of a gritty, dirty world for Frankenstein, but this felt like a musical without songs. Story 82. I turned it off halfway through. The sets and costumes are extravagant and detailed, but they also look tacky and do not make up for the bad plot. I got tired of watching Isaac wave his hands around, shouting at the camera. Story 83. I thought it was good, but it did not live up to my love of Guillermo del Toro's work, such as Pan's Labyrinth. The practical elements were gorgeous, including costumes, sets, and makeup, but the computer effects looked rough and the computer-generated animals kept pulling me out of the scenes. Story 84. It is an incredibly well-made film. It was hard to read some people's reactions here. Did we watch the same movie? Story 85. Not even monsters can be ugly anymore, which is absurd and modern nonsense. Unnecessary romantic subplots are equally nonsensical. Story 86. Yes. A gorgeous film, very dark and moody. However, some scenes dragged. Story 87. I watched it this weekend and thought it was really good. I read the book over the summer and was surprised by how different the movie was from the original story, though it still captured many of the same moments. Jacob Elordi was better than I expected as the creature. Story 88. It was alright. One of those movies you watch once, forget about, and never watch again. Story 89. I have read the book and, as some people say, it is missing some topics. Visually, it is excellent. I liked how Victor always included some red in his clothes or accessories as a reminder of his mother. The acting was strong. I also liked elements referencing Death Stranding. I am glad more came from the collaboration between Del Toro and Kojima. Story 90. It's unexpected to get such a good horror film in 2025. I think the same haters here would consider the standard jump-scare horrors in cinemas good. It is rare to find a film with so much passion. I thought it was fantastically made. Great adaptation. This film, or the original Frankenstein, is one of my favorites. Story 91. I haven't seen it, but the person at my local dispensary gave it a glowing review. Story 92. Guillermo del Toro got the look right but failed with his adaptation. Story 93. I enjoyed it. It was a different take. I liked how they handled the backstory. Story 94. I really liked it and saw it as a Frankenstein fairy tale. Story 95. I thought it was aesthetically beautiful, but for me, script-wise, it felt heavy-handed. Story 96. Well, it's 2.5 hours long, so I am going to watch the third part tonight. Story 97. It was good to see Tywin Lannister playing himself in a steampunk universe. Story 98. I could not get beyond the introduction. It looked strange. I am not in the mood for a telenovela. Story 99. It was a beautiful, lavish movie, and I enjoyed it overall. However, I had several problems. The monster starts the film as a ruthless killing machine, but the rest of the movie shows him as a gentle creature, making him feel like two different beings. Oscar Isaac's performance was annoyingly over the top. The tired misunderstanding trope occurs twice. The monster is present when the old man dies and people shout, "Get him!" And again when Mia Goth dies and people shout, "Get him!" Story 100. I saw about half of it at my brother's house last night, and it seemed like a great, faithful adaptation of the book. I will have to finish it sometime. Story 101. I really enjoyed it. I've been telling everyone I've come across about it. Story 102. I thought it was weird. The part that was really odd to me was when he was building the monster. The music, at least to me, felt full of wonder or whimsy for some reason, but old Victor was a terrible person because his father did not love him enough. The movie felt, as others have said, off-pace. Story 103. Based on the comments, it is not worth seeing. It is not the best adaptation. I also think Guillermo del Toro is overrated. It does not stay true to the book, which I gathered from the trailer. I will stick to watching Kenneth Branagh's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or rereading the book. Story 104. I watched it this weekend and I liked it. It was a unique perspective. It was not the greatest movie I have ever seen, but it was not the worst either. Story 105. I thought it was visually stunning, and the characters were well developed. Could have been a little shorter, and Mia Goth's character was not very fleshed out, but overall it was very good. Story 106. Looked great. The film itself was 7 out of 10 for me. It dragged in places, and the opening sequence was my favorite part of the movie. Story 107. I thought the movie was beautiful and crafted with care, but it was boring until the creature's story. Felt lacking in substance. I did not care about anyone except Victor, because Oscar Isaac outshone everyone else on screen. He was magnetic and, even without speaking, was extraordinary. I was in a strange headspace because the movie felt too long and at the same time not long enough. It would have worked better as a 3 to 5 episode miniseries. I have never read the novel and have limited knowledge of the story outside the various iterations in other media, so I do not know what was left out. Story 108. I enjoyed it. Unlike a lot of people, I liked the look of the creature once it switched to his point of view. Even with all the changes from the book, it is still one of the better adaptations shown on the silver screen. Story 109. I thought it was weak. It looked attractive but lacked substance. That applies to the monster and the movie as a whole. Story 110. It's excellent. Guillermo del Toro gave a fine treatment of the tale, making it less a traditional creature feature and more about the relationship between the monster and Frankenstein and what it means to be human. Story 111. As someone who hated Halloween horror films, the way he adapted this classic is amazing. The storytelling and the movie's atmosphere kept me engaged throughout. I went into it skeptical and left happy. Even my wife, who hates these types of adaptations, said that it was good when it was over. Story 112. Best movie I have seen in a long while. I would love to see more of what Frankenstein's son gets up to in a future movie. Story 113. It was the best version of Frankenstein I have seen so far. Story 114. I liked it. It held my attention, and there was never a dull moment. Story 115. I am not really that big on Frankenstein, but I thought it was a pretty good movie. Story 116. I'm in the minority and that's okay, but I didn't care for it. My partner loved it and so did everyone else. I'm not a movie snob or critic, so that's just my opinion. Story 117. I watched it last night and did not like it. I disliked almost every aspect. Story 118. It is masterful. I cannot recommend it more highly. It is easily a 2025 highlight. Story 119. I had very low expectations going into it. In my opinion, Netflix has made a lot of stinkers lately, but I was absolutely blown away by the movie. It was beautifully shot, told a great story, and I was very impressed with it. Story 120. Pacing and storytelling are good. Honestly, the last chase to the Arctic could have been longer. Story 121. I enjoyed the book, and this adaptation was fantastic. Del Toro envisioned the monster exactly as I had pictured him. The set pieces were perfect. Story 122. Although it deviated at many points from the book, it was the only movie version I have seen that truly felt like discovering the book for the first time. It was beautiful. Story 123. I thought it was a blast. In my opinion, it was fairly faithful to the original story while still making some changes, and I really enjoyed the visuals and the soundtrack. It is a movie I would happily watch again. That one line was very on the nose, though. Story 124. The very first thing you see is CGI ice and fake snow. That was kind of a bummer. It looked like a bad superhero movie. I thought Pan's Labyrinth was a better fantasy film by Del Toro, though I admittedly haven't seen it in years. Overall, I enjoyed it, though I feel the book is more nuanced in the morality of Victor and his monster. Story 125. Yes, I enjoyed it. I found a particular parallel to the current artificial intelligence boom. It is good, bad, and ugly are Frankenstein. Story 126. It was a fantastic film. I'm a harsh critic, and I kept saying, "This is an amazing movie," while watching. Story 127. To be honest, I thought it was very slow to start, but as it built up, I became increasingly gripped. By the end, I was crying because the character-driven story was so compelling. I highly recommend watching it and the behind-the-scenes feature. The sets and costumes were top-notch. Story 128. A brilliant artistic masterpiece with a realistic portrayal of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I recommend this movie to most people unless you are queasy about scenes showing body parts. Story 129. I have always despised movie versions of this tale, but this was the best I have ever seen. Story 130. Guillermo del Toro presents Hot Frankenstein. He is a monster heartbreaker. Story 131. It's his love letter to monsters. I liked it, but it stirred heavy feelings about my past and my inability to forgive. I always find myself gutted by the creature's relationship with the old man. The old man in this version raises the idea that one can be consumed by hatred and anger and only be freed through forgiveness. This life has been hell, and as much as I would like to forgive, I still carry the chains of the past and cannot let go. But I appreciate that this film reminds me that maybe one day I will. I was sad to see Victor witness his father's cruelty and, instead of learning from it, repeat the cycle. Abuse is cyclical, so it isn't surprising, but it was hard to see in this version of Frankenstein. Story 132. Thoughtfully shot and beautiful storytelling. I did not expect to get teary-eyed. Story 133. I liked it, but our boy Victor had two great talents: science and blaming others for his failures. Story 134. I did not enjoy it. The visuals were great except for a few computer-generated imagery scenes, but the story was boring. It ran too long, and the monster looked lame and was cringeworthy to watch. Rating 5 out of 10. Story 135. I started it on Saturday night and didn't realize how long it was, but we were thrilled when the second part started. I stopped there and finished it last night. It should have been a cinema release. It was the best Frankenstein I have seen, and in fact the best show I have seen in a long time. I can't imagine how it could be improved. Story 136. I loved it more than I anticipated. I went in blind but highly optimistic. I am a huge fan of Guillermo del Toro. The film was gorgeously shot. He transformed an often wrongly labeled horror story into a deeply layered tale of obsession and sadness that becomes anger. The creature's perspective was beautifully portrayed. I hope he does Bride of Frankenstein next. Story 137. It was a great movie. The actor who played Frankenstein slayed the role. I give it 8 out of 10. Story 138. My wife and I watched it last night. We both thought it was really well done. While it never dragged, I felt it might have been slightly more enjoyable as 3 episodes of a limited series. Still, it was an excellent adaptation. Story 139. I have seen this movie mentioned on Reddit so often over the last few days that I read the comments and decided to watch it. It felt like artificial intelligence slop throughout the entire movie. Perhaps this is how marketing works nowadays. Story 140. I am a huge fan of the book, and as a literature teacher I have read and taught it countless times. I have also been a fan of the director since Pan's Labyrinth, so I genuinely wanted to like this adaptation. There were some notable strengths. The depiction of the monster was interesting and, I think, quite well done. I could see many of the novel's themes coming through. However, so much was needlessly changed. The brothers' relationship, for one, and Elizabeth's character were completely altered. Elizabeth is admittedly a flat character in the book, but the film changed so much about the family dynamics and key characters that it reduced the emotional impact of the deaths. The central question of who the real monster is meant to be much more nuanced, mostly because of the body count in the book. I rolled my eyes when Victor asked for forgiveness and told the monster to live at the end. The whole point is that the creature does not want to continue living alone. When Victor abandons the creation of a female companion in the novel, the creature becomes vengeful. This fuels most of the tension and the horror of the narrative. Without that, the film felt flat. Story 141. I really didn't care for it and was shocked how well received it was, actually. Terrible computer-generated imagery throughout the whole film. Look at any scene with animals. The second half of the movie is the most self-congratulatory, toothless, award-bait script I've ever sat through. What the heck was the scene with the wolves? How did those guys go hunting for the wolves for several seasons, not find them, and leave the elderly blind man alone to fend for himself? They finally return and, of course, the wolves are back. I could rant, but I won't. Bad movie. Feed me your downvotes. I don't care. I'll die on this hill. Story 142. It had some great moments and set pieces but needed to be trimmed down. The dialogue became overly flowery in parts. The Lordy was good, but his makeup was sometimes distracting. It looked like the Aladdin Sane makeup. Story 143. I loved it. It was a beautiful film and I cried at the end. Story 144. I just finished it. The writing was beautiful and poetic. At times it felt like I was watching Shakespeare. Pure gold. The graphics were very gory at times but not gratuitous, so even when you see an eyeball or dogs eating a person it never felt like too much. Like other comments, some scenes dragged on and could have been shorter, while scenes that should have been longer felt rushed. This could have been a series, so none of the good details were lost. I would have preferred 8 one-hour episodes to feeling slighted by this 2.5-hour movie. All in all, this was a great movie. I would recommend it to anyone asking for a recommendation. Story 145. I did not like it as much as I had hoped. Having recently watched and loved the Nosferatu film by Robert Eggers, I was probably hoping for something a bit more like that, which, of course, would not have been by Guillermo del Toro. Story 146. I think they ramped up the emotion in the last 4 minutes to compensate for skipping it in favor of close-ups of tendons and blood. It was all right. The ending just felt like it belonged to a much better movie. Story 147. For me, it joined the list of decent adaptations of the book that mess up the ending. I am still waiting for one that gets it right. Story 148. Visually stunning, but the story didn't hit as hard as I hoped. Story 149. There were at least 3 moments of a character being injured and slowly dying in the arms of another character. They should have known better. Story 150. I watched it and it's not bad. It has great moments. It is about an hour too long, though. The production design I initially liked, but it's a bit over the top and at times felt like I was watching a perfume ad. Frankenstein's choice to sew together Fabio and Zoolander was just fabulous. The fact it didn't flick its hair and do blue steel when meeting Victor later on is truly one of cinema's lost opportunities. Story 151. I didn't understand it at first. I stared for 30 minutes, but it stayed exactly the same. Then I realized it was a one-sheet poster. Story 152. Overall, it was good. I am getting kind of tired of seeing Oscar Isaac in everything, though. Story 153. Is that a bad take? I just could not get into it. Maybe I will revisit this weekend. Story 154. I enjoyed it, but something felt off. It cut out much of the monster's backstory and tried to force the idea that Frankenstein was bad and the monster was good. Story 155. I waited forever for this movie to come out, and I was disappointed. It felt like they were trying to piggyback off Nosferatu with a historical monster film. They focused far too much on atmosphere and not enough on the storyline or dialogue. The girl's role seemed forced and missed its mark. If you skipped her scenes, you would not notice any change to the story. Story 156. Overall, it was a good movie, but the computer-generated imagery and the strange camera focus bothered me more than they should have. 7 out of 10, in my humble opinion. Story 157. I just don't understand how a blind man can teach someone to read. That made no sense. Story 158. It is pretty bad. Elizabeth's costuming, attitude, and manner of speaking are wrong for her character, the time period, and her social status. The tower makes no architectural sense. Victor's portrayal is a mess, and the monster's portrayal is poor. I could go on, but I did not like the movie. Story 159. I was very excited, but I kept falling asleep while reading it. It's not that good. I probably will not finish it. Read Dean Koontz's Frankenstein series. It is much better. Story 160. I was disappointed because I thought it was going to be Benicio del Toro playing Dr. Frankenstein. I did not see the movie. Story 161. Phenomenal. This should be considered for multiple Academy Awards. Story 162. I have not watched it yet, but my best friend did and said it was very good and that I will enjoy the cinematography. Story 163. I am just generally curious why, despite there being hundreds of different threads about this movie already, you decided to make a post almost 3 weeks after it came out. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.